All right, so have any of you guys ever written a romantic yet sanitized love story for a government bureaucrat? No, probably not, right? So when I first met Dan, I never imagined that 5 years later, we would be sitting in our living room in Toronto in our little apartment, writing a one-page story about how we met and fell in love, creatively titled Love Story. Right? I never thought that would happen, that we would be sending this love story to a government bureaucrat at Immigration Canada for our spousal sponsorship case. And I think the official title for this government bureaucrat is clearly Love Inspector, who would be reading the story and determining whether we actually were in love. I had no idea that would happen. And I never thought that this man who was sitting next to me, who had chased me from Korea to Taiwan to Hong Kong to India to Canada, would be sitting with me writing this letter. And then we would also have to document all those visits in an Excel spreadsheet called Cohabitations and Visits to send to the government of Canada, which honestly, you guys, just really sounds like a conjugal visit prison log. But that's what happened. And I never thought I would be rejoicing when the boy king of Canada, Justin Trudeau, started expediting the most oppressed of government immigration cases, white American men. But I was even more relieved than when I had actually immigrated here. No idea that this would happen, but 5 years ago, all I knew was that I was leaving Calgary for good. Okay. Toronto here, right? And that I was never returning back, and all I knew was that I was going to go on the 16-month trip that would start in Seoul, South Korea, and would end in Berlin, where I would crash on my friend's couch, and I knew nothing that would happen in between, or what would happen after. So I walked into this hostel in Seoul, South Korea, no idea that I would end up meeting the person I would marry on the second day of my trip. I walked in, I saw this big pile of coats that looked very much like you bought them in East Germany in about 1980s. And I saw a bunch of shoes, and I saw this book that was sticking out that said, How to Become a Canadian. So I was like, all right, there's a really creepy guy living in this hostel, and he clearly has a fetish for Canadians. Probably steer away from this guy, because, he's probably wearing overcoats and pleasuring himself to maps of Saskatchewan. I'm not judging, that's cool, that's what gets you going. I'm not judging. I just didn't want to get on this personal level with him where I would advise him PEI is actually the most phallic province. So if you're gonna pleasure yourself to a province, it would be PEI. I'm I don't really want to have that level with someone. So I was like, all right, steer clear of this guy. I didn't see him at all for the first day, but I did hear him when he came home in the middle of the night. As I later found out, he tripped over his own shoes and very loudly, very crassly, very un-Canadianly, might I add, yelled, "Kittens!" Okay, he didn't yell that at all, but, I'm here on the stage, I'm talking about phallic provinces. I don't know, I just want to keep it a little classy. Let's just say he yelled something really inappropriate. I was like, all right, definitely not talking to this guy. It's a bit odd. But I changed my mind the next day when I saw him come out of the shower. He had this beautiful curly mop on his head, like a big bird's nest. And he had these tiny little eyes, like a baby mole rat waking up. So sexy. He later told me that his eyes were so tiny that he didn't realize that they were green until I told him. He had thought they were brown. And his favorite description of the way he'd been described was having beady muskrat eyes, which were amplified by his retro glasses that made him kind of look like Buddy Holly or Woody Allen. So I was sitting there staring at his mayonnaise abs, thinking, I gotta talk to this guy. I don't know, maybe I just had this feeling deep down that one day we would be sitting together in Toronto, going over a list of questions that the government of Canada would ask us. Like, cutely adorable, what kind of birth control do you use? Just so they could test to see if we were sexually active. And I was like, maybe one day I'll sit with him and turn to him and be like, love. That's my form of birth control. So I started talking to him and I was like, hey, how's it going? And he turned around and in this really surprising show of modesty, covered up his nipples. Which I was really shocked by because the guy who's swearing at footwear isn't really the kind of person you think would be doing that, but okay. And then things started moving pretty quickly in the next week. I started learning a lot about Dan. I learned that he was a textbook editor at an English company, and I learned that the reason he was living in this hostel was because his roommate had kicked him out, and she preferred that he be hermetically sealed in his room. He disagreed. I also learned that his middle name was Ryan, which he was given by his mother because she liked a chiropractor that she used to go to, who she went to because he was treating her neck, which was a flare-up, she believed, from a former life where she'd been hanged in the Salem witch trials for trying to introduce the medical enlightenment. However, in this life, she believes that the government is injecting nanotechnological robots into your bloodstream via the flu vaccines. Yeah, we got to know each other pretty quickly during that time. And it's just in that kind of heady, exciting way when you first meet somebody overseas and you're trying to figure out what's going on between you two. And Dan was unlike anybody I'd ever met before in my life. He was just beautifully odd. He would teach me about plants, and then we would go to coffee shops, and I would turn around, and he would be eating the plants, and have just a mouthful of basil while I was buying a cappuccino. He would tell these long stream of consciousness stories that would just go off on tangents, but always ended up in something horrible. So it would be like, yeah, this one time, Johnny and I were riding around in a pickup truck, listening to this mixtape that I bought at a garage. I like garages. One time I was in a garage and a woman came by and fed me a blueberry pie. And blueberries reminded me of that evocative, rich smell in childhood. Oh yeah, anyway, Johnny was killed by a chicken truck and he died. He had a big belly laugh, which you might be hearing right now. It was really loud, and I remember one time we were on the subway, and he laughed so hard, this Korean woman screamed and ran away. We talked a lot about our childhoods. You know, we had a lot in common. I had grown up in an American oil compound in Saudi Arabia, and Dan had grown up near a plastic injection molding factory in rural Ohio. So we found lots of stuff to talk about. So that week went by pretty quickly, and after that, Dan kind of followed me around for a bit, and I couldn't stop thinking about him, and I decided to come back to Korea and spend 3 months with him, because of course, when you've been seeing somebody for 3 months, which you've only spent 1 month with them, the best logical solution is to move in with them into a bachelor apartment. And it was actually great. We got to know each other pretty well. You know, he got to learn about me, like how I despise surprise parties. I hate them because my mom is Pakistani. And while I was growing up, my mom just thought the worst thing that white people ever did to each other was have surprise parties. It was just like assaulting you in your home when you were hanging out in your sheet-printed pajamas, marinating in your scalp oil, and someone shows up with balloons. It's like, surprise, this is for you. She hated them, so she just wanted to protect me from that. So she would always tell me, okay, so your sister Rosie is having a surprise party for you on Wednesday. Try to act surprised. And it was great. I mean, those are things you can only learn about somebody when you're living together, right? So we spent those 3 months together, and I went off and was traveling around a bit, and we spent 16 months exchanging all these Facebook messages and inbox chats and things I wish I'd known that I would be sending to the love inspector to scrutinize, because I would have chosen what I sent a bit more carefully. Because if you guys knew that a government bureaucrat would be analyzing your relationship, you probably wouldn't want to be sending texts about sexy taxidermy and covering your lover in jam. You would think about what you were sending to people. Probably, right? But I didn't have that knowledge that this would end up into this. And we spent time just chasing around each other and just trying to figure out what this was. And we decided, okay, let's move to Toronto. And just like how this whole romance had started and we'd taken a big risk, we're like, let's just go over here. We had no jobs, we didn't really know anybody in the city, and we showed up with just a bunch of suitcases. And just like how we had to prove to the love inspector that our love was real, I also had to prove to landlords that we were worthy to live indoors. I succeeded. And it was a big risk, but I'm glad we did it. Because if we hadn't done it, we never would have had an apartment in Toronto where we have a holographic Jesus bathroom, where I get to tell our guests, Jesus likes to watch you bowel off and towel off. We would never have a fish named Swimmy Gibbler. And we would never have gotten that chance to sit side by side and write a one-page love story explaining the strange, strange romance that we had. And honestly, we never had the chance to really think about how one page can't really contain what a big, beautiful, strange adventure this has been. Thanks, guys.